President Lee Jae-myung is set to depart from Malaysia on Sunday for a two-day trip to attend the ASEAN summit. He'll return to host the APEC Leaders Summit next week with a summit with U.S. President Donald Trump set. Plus, the White House confirms Trump's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. South Korean officials are back from Washington following trade negotiations. Plus, President Lee said the government will monitor the potential impact of trade negotiations. The finance minister says the nation is on 24-hour alert over foreign exchange volatility amid global trade tensions. He says timely action will be taken for any foreign market issues. We begin this afternoon at the presidential office. President Lee Jae-myung is gearing up for a busy week, first attending the ASEAN summit in Malaysia and then hosting the APEC economic leaders meeting in South Korea. His office just announced the details. Our presidential office correspondent Song Yu-jin is on the line with us for the latest. Yu-jin.
Right, Toyon. So National Security Advisor Lee Seong-rak briefed reporters this morning describing the coming week as a, quote, super week of multilateral diplomacy. Now, as expected, President Lee will first travel to Malaysia on Sunday to attend the ASEAN summit, a quick trip as he'll return to Korea the very next day. First, take a listen to what the National Security Advisor had to say on the significance of the president's participation.
President Lee's first ASEAN summit will serve as an opportunity to elevate the annual $200 billion trade and over 12 million people-to-people exchange between Korea and ASEAN. His trip will also strengthen cooperation in sectors like AI and enhance joint responses to regional challenges such as online scam crimes.
So on its first evening, the president will have dinner with members of the Korean community in Malaysia. And then Monday will start with a bilateral summit with Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet, focusing on strengthening their strategic partnership and most of all, joint efforts to combat online scam crimes, an issue that has really been making headlines here in South Korea for weeks. He'll then attend the South Korea ASEAN and ASEAN Plus 3 summits, which include Japan and China, before holding talks with Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar bin Ibrahim ahead of his return flight in the afternoon.
Right, and once the president's ASEAN trip wraps up, eyes will turn to Gyeongju, where he will chair the APEC leaders meeting for this year.
You're definitely right, and the ASEAN summit is just the start because in Gyeongju, the president's calendar is packed with back-to-back summits involving South Korea's key partners.
Through summits with the United States, China and Japan, we'll complete the fastest ever round of reciprocal visits with Washington, restore relations with Beijing through the first Chinese state visit in 11 years, and sustain positive momentum with Tokyo by meeting Japan's new Prime Minister early in her term.
So President Lee will have his second in-person meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday afternoon as part of President Trump's state visit to South Korea. And his first summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping will take place on Saturday afternoon after the two-day APEC leaders meeting ends. And another closely watched moment will be the Trump-Xi summit scheduled for Thursday morning, as the White House announced earlier. Now, when asked about Lee's one-on-one with Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, Lee said that both sides are working to set a date. And during his Gyeongju trip, President Lee is also expected to meet Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and several other world leaders. Now, after returning to Seoul on Saturday night, he'll host Singapore's Prime Minister Lawrence Wong for an official visit on Sunday. Back to you, Toyon.
All right, thanks for that, Eugene. Now, South Korean officials returned from Washington, D.C. early this morning following tariff negotiations with the U.S. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us the outcome of these talks.
The Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy, Kim Yong-bum, and Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwon have returned home from Washington after holding follow-up tariff negotiations with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Though there had been some progress in the talks, the two countries still remain sharply divided over key points, the presidential aide said on Friday to the reporters at Incheon Airport.
There are still a few remaining issues, and we're now at a very critical moment. We'll do our best until the very end.
When asked about the possibility of reaching a trade deal by the time President Lee meets President Trump next week, Kim said there is still a long way to go and that time is running out.
There's no time left for additional face-to-face negotiations, and APEC is just around the corner. Time is running out, and if we're hoping for a deal to be reached around APEC, there's still a long way to go.
Kim, however, added that negotiations sometimes advance rapidly at the final stage. The officials did not disclose specific areas where they were at odds with the U.S., but one of the key issues has been differences over how to implement Seoul's $350 billion investment pledge. There were some expectations of two allies reaching a trade deal as Washington took one step back from demanding a full cash investment or upfront equity contribution, which Seoul deemed unrealistic given the country's foreign exchange constraints. However, the U.S. is still reportedly pressing for a considerable portion of direct cash investment to which South Korea is seeking to reduce the cash portion as much as possible and extend the investment period to avoid shocks to Korea's foreign exchange market. There still are some views, though, that the upcoming Korea-U.S. summit next week could provide the momentum to reach a deal. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Now, meanwhile, President Lee Jae-myung says his government is carefully reviewing the potential impact of the trade talks with the U.S. on South Korea's financial markets. That's according to an interview with the Singaporean daily The Straits Times ahead of his one-on-one with U.S. President Donald Trump next week in Gyeongju on the sidelines of the APEC leaders meeting. The president said he is exploring ways to maximize mutual benefit while remaining cautious about working towards any artificial deadline. South Korea's Finance Minister Koo said Friday that action will be taken in response to any volatility in the foreign exchange market. Speaking at a related review meeting with key financial policymakers, Koo cited global uncertainties, including U.S.-China trade tensions, as one of the reasons for foreign exchange market instability. The finance minister noted that domestic demand is rebounding due to the effects of the supplementary budget and improved consumer sentiment, with exports and domestic stock market performing better than expected. However, concerns were raised about South Korea's overheating property market, with swift action urged to address the demand for housing. Now, as we've been talking about, the APEC summit comes next week amid a fast-changing global landscape, with the strongest global powers coming face-to-face in Gyeongju. And in light of this, the United Nations former Secretary General told Arirang News the stakes are ever higher for multilateral action, with a role for South Korea as the host nation being more crucial than ever. Here's our Oh Soo-young with more.
Putting politics aside, the United States, China and Russia must seek solutions together for the future of humanity when world leaders gather at the meeting of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation in Korea next week. That's according to Ban Ki-moon, former United Nations Secretary General, in an interview with Arirang TV.
This should not be just one of the many summit meetings. This should be regarded by the leaders as the most serious APEC meeting. APEC is Asia-Pacific, but we should not confine it to the limit of Asia-Pacific. We have to look beyond the boundaries of Asia-Pacific. Otherwise, we will never be able to declare that we are living in a sustainable world. Now that the United States President and Chinese President and Russia is also member state, I sincerely hope that they sit down together with a humble mind for the future of our planet Earth and also humanity as a whole.
Amid geopolitical confrontations and trade tensions, Pan warned that the world is more divided than before, hampering the progress on tackling climate change and achieving sustainable development, both key themes of this year's APEC. Pan called on the US to return to the Paris Climate Agreement, which was reached under his leadership, bringing together 196 countries in collective carbon reduction and pledges to help developing countries attain the means for green growth.
The United States is the most powerful, most resourceful country, leader country of the world. No doubt about that. US cannot do it alone. We must join all our hands on the deck together be they political or business leaders, civil society, men and women, young people, we have moral duty to transfer this only planet Earth to our succeeding generations, to the generation next decade, next centuries.
Reflecting on his own experience as South Korea's foreign minister when the country first hosted APEC in 2005, he said that the same cooperative spirit must return to Gyeongju 2 decades later to revive multilateralism. In doing so, Pan urged current leaders to think beyond election cycles and short-term political gains for the sake of the planet they pass down to successive generations.
I'm urging particularly political leaders who are much more interested in having their political power in their hands, but those people who are in power, they bear historical as well as political responsibility. I'm sure that history will judge their leadership later.
Pan Ki-moon, who served as the 8th United Nations Secretary General, now heads the Pan Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future and chairs the Global Green Growth Institute, continuing his work to advance sustainable development and climate action across the world. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Korea's centuries-old craftsmanship is finding new life in the modern day. An exhibition at Deoksugung Palace highlights the artisans keeping those traditions alive for future generations. Our Park Hyo-bin was there.
Preserving tradition is just as important as creating it anew. A group of Korea's master artisans known as National Heritage Craftsmen have come together to showcase how traditional craftsmanship continues to thrive. Inside Deoksugung Palace, Korea's heritage is reborn through the hands of those devoted to keeping it alive. From a reinterpretation of the Irorobongdo, the iconic royal folding screen that stood behind the king's throne, to a faithful restoration of Gyeongbokgung Palace's floral walls, the exhibition features more than 120 works by artisans and apprentices across disciplines such as carpentry, painting, and sculpture. These craftspeople spent months, sometimes an entire year, replicating the exact materials or techniques of the past.
This portrait was made using yungnimun, a technique from the late Joseon period. We use natural pigments based on original recipes. Recreating the traditional process requires multiple attempts and can take 6 months to a year.
Their dedication goes beyond restoring old methods. It's about reviving the spirit behind them.
As a builder of hanok, Korea's traditional wooden houses, I am proud to promote the excellence of Korean architecture worldwide. We're doing our best to raise the global profile of our country's heritage craftsmen.
Each brushstroke and carving embodies centuries of accumulated skill and pride. And through their hands, the legacy of Korea's ancestors finds new life.
Our forebears left us this national heritage. Now it's our turn to pass it on to the next generation. That's why we keep creating, so that tradition never fades.
The exhibition, which runs until this Sunday, reminds visitors that heritage is not merely a relic of the past, but a living dialogue between yesterday and today, carried forward by those who refuse to let it disappear. Park Hyo-bin, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In Brussels on Thursday, European leaders failed to reach an agreement on using frozen Russian assets to help fund Ukraine's war effort, despite a direct appeal from President Vladimir Zelensky for urgent action. Zelensky called on the European Union to release 140 billion euros held in a Belgian clearinghouse, saying, quote, Russia brought war to our land and they have to pay for this war. But opposition from Belgium, which hosts most of the frozen funds, blocked consensus. Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever warned that his country needs guarantees that other members will share any legal or financial risks if Moscow challenges the move. EU leaders instead asked the European Commission to explore alternative financing options, postponing a final decision until December's summit. The impasse came as the EU approved its 19th round of sanctions targeting Russian liquefied natural gas and several Chinese energy buyers, while the U.S. imposed new measures on Russia's two largest oil companies. U.S. President Donald Trump granted a presidential pardon on Thursday to Changpeng Zhao, the founder of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, Binance. Zhao had already served a 4-month sentence after pleading guilty in 2024 to money laundering violations, but this pardon is likely to remove restrictions on him running financial firms. The White House called Zhao's prosecution part of the prior administration's, quote, war on cryptocurrency, saying Trump acted to correct Biden-era overreach. But critics, including Senator Elizabeth Warren, labeled the move, quote, a kind of corruption, citing Trump's personal crypto investments and family business links to Binance-backed ventures. The decision follows Trump's broader push to ease crypto rules. In New York on Thursday, the NBA was rocked by a sweeping federal gambling investigation that led to the arrests of Portland Trail Blazers coach Chauncey Billups, Miami Heat player Terry Rozier, and more than 30 others accused of rigging games and poker matches tied to mafia families. Prosecutors say Billups joined a poker-fixing conspiracy that used X-ray tables, hidden cameras, and special sunglasses to cheat gamblers out of at least $7 million. Rozier is charged with sharing private player information and leaving games early to help rig bets. FBI Director Kash Patel said the operation revealed tens of millions of dollars in fraud, theft, and robbery. Both men face money laundering and wire fraud conspiracy charges and have been placed on leave as the NBA pledges full cooperation. The league said, quote, the integrity of our game remains our top priority. In Nigeria, discarded plastic bottles, wrappers, and metal tops took on a new life this week. A bold trashing show in Lagos turned that waste into fashion and art. The event, staged by the Green Fingers Wildlife Initiative, featured students and teenage designers who built colorful outfits entirely from recycled beach litter. Founder Chinedu Mogbo said this year's theme, Sea Turtle Awakening, highlights how plastic pollution threatens marine life across West Africa. Nigeria produces about 2.5 million tons of plastic waste each year, much of it ending up in rivers and the Atlantic Ocean. Models said the fashion show proves that, quote, beauty can also be sustainable. Organizers hope the spectacle will inspire young people to fight plastic pollution, one recycled design at a time. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
Hope the fog didn't cause you a headache this morning. The fog has lifted, but the skies will remain partly cloudy for most of the day. Meanwhile, the East Coast will be rainy, with a heavy rain advisory being issued along the east coast of Gangwon-do province, where showers were lashing down 10 to 20 millimeters per hour. And it's going to be wet through tomorrow morning. Temperature-wise, we will enjoy this near-average autumn weather through the weekend, but get ready for a dramatic shift next week. On Tuesday, Seoul starts the day at just 2 degrees Celsius, and some of the central areas will see temperatures dip below freezing. But this afternoon, Seoul and Daegu will reach a pleasant 20 degrees Celsius. Gwangju, Busan, Jeju will be topping out at 22 degrees. After that big cold hits us early next week, temperatures will stay colder than normal through the end of the month. Many are coming down with a cold, so please take care.
That's all we have for today's noon edition of Arirang News. Thanks for watching. We'll be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Stay tuned.